Hi, this is Anil from Learning Led Education and welcome to another tutorial on Java programming language. So in this tutorial, we're gonna learn about the private access specifier. So in the tutorial on the public and default access specifier, I have told you guys that there are 4 types of access specifiers in Java: the public access specifier, the private access specifier, the default access specifier, and the protected access specifier. So we have learned about the public and default access specifier in the tutorial, and here in this tutorial we're gonna be learning about the private access specifier. So now here, for the demonstration purpose, I have created my private project. The name of the project is private, and then I have this oops package inside my source folder, and I have a couple of classes. I have this student class which is empty right now, and also I have this tutorials class where I have this main method. Alright, now all of you know that the public class members are available everywhere. We can access them in the Java environment, and the class members with the private access specifier are only available inside the class where they are defined. Now, to have a private member of a class, we need to use the private keyword. First, we need to write the access specifier. So here it's gonna be private, and then we need to specify whether it's gonna be a static member or it's gonna be an instance member. If your member is gonna be an instance member, then you don't need to use the static keyword. Then we need to specify the type of data you want to store. So here let me say a string, and then the name of the member. So here name. Now this name property of this class, or this name variable of this student class, is the private member, and because of that, this name property is only available inside this class. So we can't access this outside this class. So here, for the demonstration purpose, I'm gonna have a public class member. So let's say public int and age. Now what I'm gonna do is, in my tutorials class, I'm gonna create an object of the student class first. So it's gonna be student Anil equal to new student, and now we try to access this name property. So I'm gonna write Anil dot, and then if I try to write name, or if I try to access the private member, then we're gonna get the error. For example, let me try to assign it the value of Anil, and now you guys can see the error here. It says the field student.name is not visible. That's because it's the private member. So when we have a private member in your class, that member is only available inside the class where you have defined it. So here, I can access this age member. So if I try to access it, for example, Anil.age equal to 24, then it's gonna work. That's because this age is the public property, so it is accessible, and this private is only accessible inside this student class. So we can access this private in any of the methods inside this student class. So just to demonstrate that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a method, and let me call it as introduce. And here inside this method, we're just gonna print out the value stored in this name and the age. So I'm gonna use the system.out.println, and here we're gonna say name is, then we try to append the name, and then we're gonna say and age is, and then we're gonna append the age. All right, now this initialization is not possible, so I'm gonna remove this, and then I'm gonna call the introduce method on this Anil object. So it's gonna be Anil.introduce, and if I run this program, you guys can see name is null and age is 24. So here this name is a reference variable, and by default it's gonna contain a value of null, and that's the value printed when we call this introduce method. So Now all of you know that a private member is only accessible inside the class where we have defined it. Alright, now I can't access this name member or this private member. Then how the heck I'm gonna initialize this name member? All of you know that we can access this name property inside any method which are gonna be defined in the student class. So we're gonna have a public method. So here let me call this as set name, and here this method is going to take a string parameter. So let me call it as iname, and in this method what we're going to do is we're going to initialize the name property with whatever the value we're going to receive for this iname. So it's going to be name equal to iname. So now we have a method, and through that method we're gonna be initializing this private property. So here we have the default access specifier for this set name method. We can have the public, so let me use the public. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna run this program. Here after creating my object, by using this set name method we're gonna set the value for this name member. So I'm gonna write Anil dot set name, and then I'm gonna pass the string value. So it's gonna be Anil, and then I'm gonna run this. Now you guys can see name is Anil and age is 24. So now when we have a private member in a class, that member is only available inside the class where we have defined it. And at that time, if you want to access that private member outside the class, at that time you guys can have the public methods defined in the same class, and through that methods you're gonna access the private member. So here the set name method is used to initialize this name property. Now here, what if I want to get only the name property? So at that time we can have another method which is gonna get the name. So we're gonna have the public method, and it's gonna return a string value. So it's gonna be string as the return type, and we're gonna call it as get name, and this method is not gonna take any parameters, and it's gonna return the name property. Now this name member or this name property is private, and that's why it's not accessible directly. So we have a couple of methods called set name and get name, and by using them we are accessing the name property outside this class. Since these methods are public, we can access these methods. So here now in my main method what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna use a println statement. So it's gonna be system.out.println, and here we're gonna say name is, and then we're gonna call the get name method of this Anil object. So it's gonna be get name, and now I'm gonna run this, and it says name is Anil. So here from the student class we are using a couple of public methods to access the private property, and this get name and set name methods are together called as the getter and setter methods respectively, and they are also called as the accessor and mutators. They are nothing but the normal public methods which are used to access the private member of a class. Alright, now we have seen about the private property. Similar to this private property, we can have the private methods. So here in my student class, let me have a private method. So to define a private method, first we need to specify the access specifier as private. So it's going to be private, and then if your method is going to be a static method, then you have to use the static keyword, otherwise you don't need to use any keyword. And after that we need to write the return type of the method. So here, just for the demonstration purpose, let's say it's going to be void type, and here let's say this method name is gonna be do something, just for the demonstration purpose, it's going to be okay. And let's say our method is not going to take any parameters. And then we have the method body. Here I just gonna say I'm doing something, so it's gonna be system.out.println, and here we're gonna refer the name property, so it's gonna be name. Then I'm gonna append some string, and we're gonna say is doing something. Alright, now we have this private method. Just like the way the private properties of a class are only available inside that class, these private methods are also available only inside the class. So here I can't access this do something method outside this student class. So here if I try to access the do something method, so it's gonna be anil.do something, and now you guys can see here the error is shown. And if I hover on that, it says the method do something from the type student is not visible. This do something method is only accessible or visible only inside the class where we have defined it, just because it is a private method. So now what is the use of this private method? I can't access this method outside this class. Then what's gonna be the use of this? So what you can do is, inside the class you can have the private methods, and you can divide your logic into several parts, and you guys can use them whenever you need it inside the other methods of that class. So here I can use this do something method inside my introduce method. So here I'm gonna use the do something method, and now here we're just gonna call the introduce method. I'm just gonna remove this, and now if I run this, you guys can see here name is Anil, which is from this println statement. Then when we call this introduce method, it's gonna print out Anil is doing something, which is from the do something method, and then it says name is Anil and age is 24. So here by using the private methods, you can divide your work into several parts, and whenever you're gonna need that, you just need to call that method. So because of this, what happens is, you're gonna be reusing the code, so you don't need to write the code for the same thing again and again. And the next thing that I want you guys to teach you is, we can have this private access modifier for a constructor also. So here, just for the demonstration purpose, let me create a constructor. It's gonna be the private keyword for the access specifier, then the method name, which is gonna be same as the class name. Now we have this private constructor, and this private constructor is only accessible inside this class. And now if I try to create an object from the student class by calling this default constructor, then it will not work, because here while creating an object with the new keyword, we're gonna be calling the constructor. So this constructor is private, and that's why it is available only inside this class. So I can't call this constructor, and that's why we can't create an object from this student class by calling this constructor. So here, let's say we're gonna have another constructor with the public access specifier. So let's say student, and let's say it's gonna take a parameter, so string name, and then at that time, now we can call this constructor to create an object of the student class because it is public. But I can't use this constructor to create an object, this constructor with no parameter at all, because it is the private constructor. So here what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pass a string value. So here you guys can see we are getting the error because we are trying to call the constructor with no parameter at all, which is private. Now let me pass a string value. Now what happens is, the error disappears. That's because now we are calling the constructor, which is gonna take one string parameter, and it is public, and that's why we can create an object from the student class. So if you have a private constructor in your class, then you can't use that constructor, that private constructor, to create an object. So the next thing you guys may ask, like, what's gonna be the use of a private constructor? you can use a private constructor if you don't want to create an object from a class. Okay, why the heck I don't want to create an object from a class? So let's say you're gonna have a class where you're gonna have all the members as static. You have the static properties and then you have the static members. So at that time, there is no need to create an object of that class. So at that time, you guys can have the private constructor. Because of that, the user can't create an object from that class. So if you want an example, you guys can check out the math class from Java. And for the math class, we have the private constructor, and because of that, you can't create an object of the math class. Alright, the next thing that I want you guys to teach you is for the classes and for the interfaces, which we haven't learned till now. We're gonna learn about that in some other tutorial. The classes and interfaces cannot have the private access modifier. So for the student class, if I try to have the private access modifier, then we're gonna get the error. And if I hover on that, it says illegal modifier for the class student, only public, abstract and final are permitted. So we can't have the private access specifier for the classes and interfaces. So the last thing that I want you guys to teach you in this tutorial is gonna be, okay, what's gonna be the use of the private access specifier? So this private access specifier helps us to encapsulate the data. For example, in our previous tutorial, I have showed you guys how you can track the number of objects created from a class. So we're gonna have a static member. Let's say it's gonna have the public access specifier. So it's gonna be public static, and then I need to specify the data type. Let's say it's gonna store the integer value, and then I need to give a name. So let me say it's gonna be num students, or number of objects, anything. So let me say num students, and I'm gonna initialize that one to a value of 0 here. Now we're gonna have a constructor. So it's gonna be public student. We're gonna have the default constructor, and inside this constructor, we're just gonna increment the value of the num students, the static member. Now this num students is gonna contain the number of objects created by using this class. So we're gonna have a method, public method. So here, let me call it as void how many students. Here we're just gonna print out the value stored in this num students member. So I'm gonna use a println statement. So it's gonna be system.out.println, and here I'm gonna say they are totally. I'm gonna append the num students. All right. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna make this method as static. It doesn't matter, if it is a normal method, then you just need to call this from an object. So now we have this static method so that, we can call it from this class. All right. Now here in our tutorial class, we have created one object. So here, after all these things, let me indent it properly. All right. Now, after all these things, I'm gonna call the how many students method to find out how many objects are created from this student class. So here I'm gonna call it by using the class name. So it's gonna be student dot how many students. All right, now I'm gonna run this program, and it says there are totally 1 students, and here I'm gonna create another object. So it's gonna be student, and then let me call it as Srish equal to new student. Now we have used this student class to create 2 objects, and that's why this how many students method is gonna return a value of 2. If I run this, you guys can see there are totally 2 students. Now we have this num students with the public access modifier. So because of this, I can access this num students directly here, and I can alter the value. So here, after calling this how many students method, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna alter the value by using the class, then the dot operator and num students property, and I'm gonna set a value of 10, and then I'm gonna call this method again, how many students method. Now if I run this, you guys can see there are totally 10 students. So this is wrong. We have created only 2 objects by using this student class. So since this num students is of public type, I can tamper the data. So I have altered the data. So what we can do is we can have the private access specifier for this num students member. So now what happens is this member is only available inside this class, and that's why I can't access that member directly outside that class and tamper the data. Now you guys can see here, we can't access this num students property of this student class because it is a private property and it's only available inside the class where we have defined it. So I can't access it outside the class where I have defined it. So there is no way that I can tamper this data. So now this how many students method is always gonna produce the proper result. So by using this private property, the data manipulation can be avoided. So the data is gonna be safe. And here you guys can see we are getting a warning here. That's because we haven't used this switch object, and you guys can do that just for the demonstration purpose. I haven't initialized it. If you guys want, then you guys can experiment with it. Alright guys, this is it. This is about the private access modifier, or the private access specifier in Java. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you guys think that you guys have learned something from this tutorial, please like this video and share it with your friends and help us to reach more people. And also you guys can like my Facebook page at facebook.com/learninglad, and also you guys can tweet me on Twitter at learninglad.edu, and get the source code of this tutorial in my website learninglad.com, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.